Hello, it's Rob Watson, and this is a Decentered media vlog. We're back in lockdown here in Leicester, so it kind of feels a bit weird at the moment. We thought we were like everybody else in the UK. We were kind of emerging from our various holes and emerging to gradually take our place in a more outward facing social world. But for reasons beyond my control, is that we're back in back in our homes, staying away from each other, and keeping 2 meters distance apart and wearing our face masks. So it's a bit weird. So what I want to kind of just talk about for a minute, and this feels a bit strange because actually I tried to record this a few minutes ago out in the yard, and everything's really quiet, and it spooked me out a little bit because I'd got out of the frame of mind of things being quite quiet. It was quite nice during the main lockdown to get used to hearing the birds sing and to listen out for, kind of, well, the absence of traffic noise, and then suddenly to go and sit in the yard a few minutes ago and for it to be deathly quiet again was just spooked me out a little bit. So my emotions are a little bit up and down, so I thought I'd share this anyway. Apologies for the kind of mess behind. Actually, it is tidy. There's just a lot of stuff piled up. It all has a place and it all has a function. It just looks incredibly messy, but it is well organised. What you can't see by the camera is where the real mess is. Anyway, what I want to talk about for a minute is the way in which the communications have been managed as part of the COVID-19 pandemic response. And particularly I want to think about community media, community radio, some of the alternative forms of media that we've got, some independent publishing, independent news, and really what's here in Leicester, what is now clearly something has gone wrong with the communications, because why are we having a second spike and an increase in infections if the communications process was working? And this is not to ascribe blame to this, because that doesn't give us answers. That doesn't give us the confidence to turn over all of the stones and look at the issues that are there. But this is to really think through and ask some difficult questions and search for alternative solutions. So one of the challenges of the COVID-19 response is that the communications largely been managed centrally. So we've seen display advertising from the government on display boards. There's all those BT electronic Wi-Fi enabled boards around our cities now. They've replaced telephone boxes, and they've had lots of information and lots of signs about keeping your distance, staying indoors, protect the NHS, all of that kind of messaging. And then there's the signage that all of the shops has produced, and the level of communication with this has been very clear. There's some really great design work to produce simple, clear messages that people can understand. But the problem has been that this is concentrated in, if you like, the city centres. And when we listen to and look at our media, we're probably seeing the same model replicated in our mass media. So when we look at our print media, the newspapers, government adverts, when we look at our listen to our radio stations, government messages, when we watch our TV programs, government messages. And one of the things that Ofcom, and I've said this previously, have found is that information overload is now a problem, and communicating to people in hard to reach, so-called hard to reach communities has become a problem, and evidently so here in Leicester. So one of the big challenges, and the local council, the Leicester City Council, has produced a strategy for dealing with the second wave. which has an element to it which is about communications. And it is typically the top of the list is get on BBC Leicester, talk to get things into the Leicester Mercury, talk to the local commercial radio stations, be on the ITV local news, those kind of things, be on the East Midlands regional news. So they're the kind of top priorities. There's some use of social media using the council's Twitter account, and there's some use of talking, handing out leaflets, things like that, and visiting doctors' surgeries and public places and handing out leaflets. And it's really only now that we've included the community radio stations within the repertoire of opportunities to engage with the public. And I'm a bit frustrated about that, because early in the lockdown, there was an effort to try and get an organised approach to this, where we recognised, and this was something that we talked about when we were planning Ramadan Radio, is and the mutual aid group in Leicester were very keen on this as well, is to support material which was in the language of the vast, very diverse communities in Leicester. This was done at one stage with the help of a company called Shrinker Digital, and they produced these really great videos which would go out across multiple platforms. And I did a podcast with them, and Jal Kang talked about the way that this media could be repurposed to go across Instagram, to go across Twitter, to go on TikTok, to go on all the formats that you could possibly think of to be getting the message out there. As far as I know, as far as I'm aware, it was only really placed on YouTube, and it wasn't distributed widely. And the other criticism was that while it was visual and it was in lots of different languages, it had been translated very effectively into lots of different language, there was no audio component, there was no spoken component to it as well. And that kind of, we've missed an element, we've missed a trick, we've not included part of the dimension of communication, which is that, what makes us, what enables us, when do we respond to messages? It's kind of when we hear something that we recognise. Auditory information is incredibly powerful. Radio is still a very powerful medium for communication. And particularly when you hear voices that you recognise and voices that are familiar, talk a familiar language or dialect, talk in an idiom, in a kind of a sense of expression which is close to what you recognise. If it sounds alien, if it sounds as if it's preaching at you, if it sounds as if it's instructing you, you're less likely, and there's probably some good studies that we can, reflect on afterwards about this, you're less likely to want to change and adapt and to pick up from what's being said. And we know in practice terms in community media that social change is very effectively supported and encouraged when people identify with those who are talking. So giving people a voice to talk about things in their own way and using their own style of expression and using their own reference points is incredibly important. And hopefully in this kind of second push to improve and change attitudes and behaviours, because clearly in Leicester they've identified a need to do that, then we should look at every avenue, every turn things over. Don't make assumptions. I think my understanding is that the government's process for communications has been aimed at what I would regard as the kind of middle class, middle-aged mainstream. The supermarket shoppers, Waitrose, Asda, Sainsbury's. You go to a garden centre, you might go to a car boot sale, you go to the pub, have a meal with your friends, that kind of thing, and that's regarded as the mainstream. Outside of that, they've been terrible at communicating with young people from different ethnic backgrounds, people with different languages, people with different cultural references. And I was really disappointed today with Boris Johnson because effectively what he said at Prime Minister's questions was that the government has been great about this. It's the people of Leicester who are at fault, and that's complacency. And when I look at the press coverage that's emerged and that's been come forward over the last couple of days about Leicester and Leicester East specifically, there's a specific set of needs in that area of this city which aren't being met, which aren't being addressed. People aren't being talked with, they're being talked at. So people zone out. And if you're a member of the Afro-Caribbean community, for example, and you've been subject to messages over the last 5 years where you're told you're not welcome in this country, why would you listen to messages from the Home Office encouraging you to wash your hands? You're going to be disdainful and suspicious of officialdom when you've been, when the job seekers allowance process, when they, social welfare, social support for job protection means that you get hounded by the job centres, that you get, you're not going to, engaging with officialdom has become a very pernicious, nasty kind of process. There's nothing welcoming, there's nothing supportive about it. So why would you expect people when things change, when there's a crisis, for everybody to suddenly go, well, we'll forget about all of that? People do have memories, and the communication that you use at times like this has to respect that and has to engage with that. So it's kind of, there's a lot of thinking to be, and a lot of reflecting, and on my own practice and the way that I support community media. Really need to kind of turn this over and start to think about how the work that I support can be done in different ways, which is more directly engaging and breaks out of, I have a tendency to talk to people in the academic community. That's my comfort zone. How do we get out and talk to people more directly who come from a different perspective, have different experiences, and that, the positive side of community media is that's what it's based around. It does that. It kind of allows people to create a space where they can speak for themselves and make media for themselves, which represents themselves and their communities and their networks and their friends, and that kind of ground up, that bottom up process. So there's a lot of change that's needed, and we need to reflect on this in the longer term. We need to make some immediate changes now. We need to include more community media organisations, both broadcast, online, film, sound, press, newspapers. We need to, in the city of Leicester, there is an argument that it is a news desert, that its news is provided by a very few organisations and it's not spread widely among other communities. So there's a real need for us to look at the practices of information and communication within the city and learn from that and change it and adapt it. And hopefully that's a kind of contribution to going forward in future work, that if we can establish some common ground and some thinking. This is all for discussion. I don't have fixed views on this. I would like to hear other views about this, and I'd like to hear other perspectives and to be involved in conversations, and for me to be able to listen. That's a great thing that I get out of doing the podcast, just to listen to what people are telling me. And I love those moments where you realise I've thought about this way for so long, and when somebody's telling me something else and you really hear that, it really helps you and changes your perspective. And hopefully the podcast that we do in the future will encourage that in more depth. If you want to get in touch, I'm on Decentered Media, which is Twitter and Instagram. Welcome any messages there, or you can email me at robwatson@decentered.co.uk. The website is decentered.co.uk. Always look forward to any support that people are going to offer via Patreon, which will help to pay for tea and biscuits. But until next time, I was going to say enjoy the lockdown. Keep to the lockdown. keep to the lockdown, stay safe, stay distant, wear your masks, wash your hands. Keep repeating those simple messages, even now. Even though we're all sick to death of them, keep repeating them. Wear your mask. I walk around Leicester. I've just been for a walk for some exercise now. Hardly anybody's wearing a mask. Get some masks. Give them to your friends. It's really important.